This program raises questions. This program is for people who find it hard to trust God. The best answers are wrapped in flesh and blood. My friends, people who are enduring real tragedies every single day. Quadriplegia, muscular dystrophy, stroke, bankruptcy, loneliness, singleness. We're going to talk to those very people who have touched my life.
Okay, we need for you to be happy today, Rye. 1, 2, 3. There's a smile. There's a smile. There you go, buddy.
Doug, tell me a little bit, how was it with Ryan back when you were a young dad and you first learned that your son, when he was birthed, was not totally what we would call normal?
It was gruesome almost. I don't mind using that word. It was for a new dad with no experience with disability, with no experience with deformity. This head and face was, all the parts were in the wrong place. But almost immediately, the doctor, who also had never seen any of this, turned away from me and held the baby so that I wouldn't be able to see him. And it was just his human response, I think, to me. And he just said over his shoulder, I'm sorry. I don't see how this child can live but a few minutes.
One conversation with a doctor and your life changes forever. I mean, there you are on top of the world 1 minute. The next, you're shocked, stunned, bewildered by the fact that life is never going to be the same. That's where Doug Mazza found himself. I mean, there he was, senior American executive for Suzuki Motor America, and then recruited by Hyundai for its senior position. This man was at the top of the U.S. corporate ladder when everything ground to a halt. His youngest son, Ryan, was born with a horrible birth defect. It was, as Doug put it, pretty gruesome. And knowing what I know about Crouzon syndrome, I would add insidious. And you have to ask yourself why. I mean, you have to wonder if God is able to, really reach down into such evil and wrench out of it genuine good, as Romans 8:28 from the Bible suggests. I mean, how do you muster the spark of faith that lights that fuse? I mean, looking at Ryan, it sounds so theoretical. Yet, I am convinced, and I think at the end of our time together, you will be too, that God is trustworthy. For Ryan, this young man with a birth defect, became the pathway of blessing, not only for Doug Mazza and his family, but for tens of thousands of people with disabilities around the world.
When I came out of the Army, I had a lot of focus in life. And I was really ready to get on with my life and my career. And I was really driven. I felt as though there wasn't anything I couldn't do. And so I got into corporate life, and frankly, things went well for me. I did well at an early age. I found myself at the age of 39 running a $600 million company that was Suzuki of America. Life was good. It was really good. And then God gave me my third son, Ryan. If I can interrupt for a minute, I'm Doug Mazza, and I am the president here at Joni and Friends, and I want to add my welcome to all of you for being here today. This is a stake in the ground for people affected by disability. This is a 34,000 square foot building built on 2 floors, and what you see in the reflecting pool here is Amos 5:24, but let justice roll on like a river and righteousness like a never-failing stream. I was in the delivery room, and it became quite evident that there was trouble. And I didn't know what it was, but I could tell from the personnel around that there was difficulty with this child being born. This is our art wall, and all of this art are originals that were drawn or painted by Joni Eareckson Tada. So why don't you come around this side, and you'll see some of Joni's art. As you're coming around, you might look over your shoulder at Joni painting, drawing actually in that particular picture with her teeth. The doctor just took this incredible baby that was so even hard to look at, and he turned away so that I wouldn't have to look at it, and he just said over his shoulder, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't see how this child can live like this more than a few moments.
This his room?
This is his room. Thanks for being here today with him. I really appreciate your giving him his latest exam.
Hey, good morning, Ryan.
Hi, Rye. You happy today?
How you doing, friend? All right.
There's half the exam right there.
Yeah. Let's go take a look in your ear here. That's it. That's good position. All right. Okay.
Dr. Block, while I have your time, I've always been curious about exactly where that suture is that caused Ryan all this problem when he was born.
Well, as I think you know, that when we're born, our skull is formed, but there are sutures that keep it spread to allow the brain to grow and expand normally without being pressed. Here's a normal skull, and we have sutures that then are with space, and these close as we get older.
So that's what parents call the soft spots in the head.
The soft spots in the head. Mm-hmm. And part of what they did in Ryan's case was, in the surgeries, to cut where the sutures had closed, to cut that, put in spacers, and make more room for the brain to expand. I don't have the actual pictures for Ryan, but this gives you an idea.
Yeah. His brain was actually born bulging forward, had pushed his forehead out, which is a Crouzon syndrome. It's very typical in Crouzon's survivors. His eyes had been pushed out of the sockets. His cheekbones were spread apart. His jaw was dislocated.
And how old was Ryan when you first started the series of surgeries?
His first major surgery was at 2 weeks, a craniofacial advancement. And we didn't see Ryan's face again for a couple of months. And when it did, it was radically changed. But Crouzon it acts like a disease in the early phases. As long as the bone is maturing, in a Crouzon child, the bones don't grow symmetrically. Half of Ryan's skull would grow in one direction and half in a different direction, and the bones on the internal part of his skull pinched his optic nerves, and he lost his sight at 6 months. And so the surgeries were almost constant. He was in the hospital about 18 months of his first 3 years of life. There you go. There you go. Not so bad, huh? Yeah. It's okay. It's okay, buddy. We're almost done.
Oh, look at that. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Did the doctors talk to you about the various options to have? Did you have hope that he would become a normal son?
That was my hope, and selective hearing kicks in as a parent. Mm-hmm. And now that I look back on it, and with a more mature approach to it, I was getting a stronger mixed signal from the physicians than I was willing to accept. I was also in a mode of my life at the time, spiritually, where I wanted a normal son more than anything else. It was I wanted him to be normal. I wanted him to be like every other child. I think every parent does. There were several times when Ryan was very close to death. I was called at work one day and told to come to the hospital right away. And as any of us would do, I left work immediately, and I knew where Ryan would be. I went up on the top floor of the hospital where the children's pediatric intensive care ward was. And I went into his room when I found him, and it was dark in his room. It was only 4 in the afternoon, but they had closed all the curtains, and there were so many doctors and nurses around him, I couldn't even see him. And so I just stood back in the room, and I listened to this doctor speak until finally there was a break in the conversation. And finally I leaned forward and I tapped the senior surgeon on the shoulder. And he turned around and recognized me, and I said, "How's Ryan?" And he said, "Mr. Maz, I need to talk to you down the hallway." And so he and I and a nurse went down the hallway to the children's playroom. The doctor was well into his 60s, who had seen so much and had fought so hard for Ryan, with tears in his eyes as he welled up. He said, there comes a time when medical science has done all that it can do. And for your son Ryan, I'm afraid that time is now. And I don't see how he can live more than 3 days. And what I did decide is that if Ryan was going to go through this, I would go through it with him. And so I went back to his room and I took off my jacket and I sat down in a chair and we sat there for 3 days and 3 nights, watching Ryan's chest rise and fall, waiting for him to take his last breath. And he fought for every breath. He really fought for every breath. His heart rate never went below 180, went up as high as 250 as he struggled to stay with us. And then on the 3rd day, he began to stir. And as he stirred, he rolled his head toward me. In that moment, our eyes met. And Ryan looked into me in a way that no one has ever looked into me since or before. And I could see what Ryan was saying to me. He was saying, Daddy, help me. Help me. You're the one that I put my trust in. You're the highest power that I know. I don't know anything greater than you. You're the one that told me I was going to be okay. And in that moment, I knew that I had never had that authority to tell him that. And my heart broke. And I got down close to Ryan's ear. And for the first time, I gave him away. I said to him, Ryan, I can't help you anymore. Jesus Christ is going to take care of you now. And with that, he slipped back into his coma, and I slipped down onto the floor, holding onto the side of the bed. Just a total emotional wreck, releasing everything that I had been holding back for all this time. One of the few good decisions I made in those early days of faith was that I never got angry with God. I got curious as to how God worked, and I could see no pathway of success for Ryan. I couldn't understand what his suffering was about. I couldn't understand what his place in the world was. I didn't know why he had been born. And so rather than get angry, I got curious. And that drove me to the Bible. And I began reading the Bible and found out that God had a lot to say about people with a disability. In fact, it's who Jesus hung out with the most. He hung out with the crippled and the blind and the lame. And he gave them hope. And for many of them, he even gave them complete healing. And so as I began to get into the scripture, I began to develop a personal relationship and find out what a personal relationship was with God.
So when we get to where we're going, to the theater where we're going to be doing the distribution, we're going to set up the area just like we always do with the 5 points, and then Janet, you're going to decide whether or not you want to go up and do the assessments, right? And then you guys tell us how you want it set up. I mean, you're the therapists and the mechanics, and we'll just set it up the way you want, where the registration table is going to be, so the best flow of the families. And because of the setup,
Jesus Christ says, go out into the roads and country lanes and make them come in. Bring in the poor and the lame and the blind.
Que traer a los pobres y a los maltratados y a los ciegos.
Because without them, my house is not full.
Porque sin ellos mi casa no está llena.
Everyone here is very, very important to Jesus
Cada uno de
Christ.
ustedes, de los que están acá, son muy importantes para nosotros y para Él.
Everyone here, regardless of condition, is made in the image of God. You are the people that Jesus Christ loved the most. And so as you are important to him, you are important to us, who will be spending eternity together. May God bless each and every one here today.
Muchas gracias.
God thinks so much of us individually with all our brokenness. He loves us so much that he loves to accomplish what he wants to accomplish through us. And he gives us the opportunity to do that. God does not elbow his way into your life. He waits for you to invite him in. And once you have that experience of inviting him in, extraordinary things can take place in your life. Let's go check this.
Let me walk you through.
Let's make sure the process is set up.
Okay. This is the registration desk. All the applicants are here with their picture.
Okay.
And then they when the person comes, they match the picture up and give them a slip and a number.
Okay, and we have their diagnosis, and
They come here.
well, it helps the physical therapist know where to get started.
So then afterwards, they sit here until the therapists are ready, and then they just call them. Depending on the severity of the disability is which therapist gets them.
Yeah.
And some of the therapists are better with the adults and the elderly, and some are better with the pediatrics and the children's, the different types of disabilities.
So here's our inventory.
Here's our inventory, right? Different sizes.
How
and
many
shapes.
chairs do we have today?
We have about 50 chairs today, and we're going to have 45 recipients.
Okay, so they've already been measured. We have the right chairs for the right people.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to follow Christ when he's willing to feed us on a hillside and feed the 5,000 with just a few loaves of bread and a small fish. Everyone would love to follow Christ when he's standing in a boat and we're sitting on the beach and hearing this wonderful preacher. But follow him up to Calvary, follow him up the hill to the cross, that's a tough place to follow Jesus. And we would never ever arrive there if it wasn't for the suffering in our life. It's like the dog that is snapping at our heels as we travel up that road to our final ending in eternity in paradise with him in heaven. And that's as personal a relationship as you can possibly have with Jesus, is when you are sharing in his sufferings. Forgive my appearance.
You're working here.
Yes, we are, but thanks to you we are. Without you we wouldn't be here.
The mayor is involved. The mayor's wife, she really has a heart for children. And so she has been the one that's been helping us now for 2 years.
Oh, great.
And she set this all up.
So that's how we begin to change culture about the attitudes of people affected by disability.
Exactly.
We get the government involved, we get the local church involved, and bring Christ into the whole process.
Okay, I need a good interpreter. Interpreter? Okay, I want you guys to take every bit of the crowds out of here. No people, no people. Bring them all down that way. So he's not on any medication right now.
She's on medication, she got medication. ¿Tiene medicina ahorita?
After they have a seizure.
What's her name? ¿Cómo se llama?
God knows every situation in advance of it happening. We serve a God that never wakes up surprised. He knows what the outcome at the end of the story is. The idea of finding meaning in suffering is one of the most comforting parts of Christianity, and also one of the biggest challenges that keeps people from coming into a relationship with Christ. Many people say, how could I trust a God who would leave, for example, Joni Eareckson Tada in a wheelchair for 40 years? How can she be so faithful when God has left her in that condition, paralyzed? And her answer, which I think is a wonderful answer, is that I could not trust a God who didn't know what suffering was. You couldn't convince me to trust in him, but that he wrote the book on suffering himself, that God was willing to suffer and come down to earth and experience every possible portion of suffering man will ever experience, tells me that he's the kind of God that I can put my faith in. Like the United States, it's got ocean on both sides. You know, it goes all the way across Central America.
Were you on the eastern part or the western part?
I was on the top at 6,000 feet. So we were up in San Jacinto, Chimaltenango, and places that I'm very impressed that I can say.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm really impressed. It's not even on here.
And, no, they're not on there, believe me. These are places that time forgot, but God did not. And we had a very productive time up there. There's some good folks up there doing very good work that could really use a boost. And what we do is we come in Guatemala and into Guatemala City and San Jacinto, and we bring resources to those that are there, multiply what they're doing, and that accelerates the disability ministry.
What do you sense as the most areas of greatest activity for us?
Well, we are spending probably the largest percentage of any one country is being done in China, and that's on purpose. We have written that into our strategic plan, and that's because there is so much to be done there. The doors are opening, especially for someone of my generation, to think that I could have friends in China as a baby boomer, and to be doing work in China is just an incredible dream all to itself. And the work there is booming. I think it's important when we think of Romans 8:28 that we not just say all things work together for the good, because we can look in the world and know that all things don't work together for the good. There are qualifications in order to light the fuse of a Romans 8:28, and it is that confidence in God, that trusting in God, that walking with Him, that trusting that He will take you through your current circumstance and get you to the other side. And when you get there, that's when all of it is used for his special purpose. I've witnessed that in my own life. I see it in the lives of people around me. I see it in the life of Joni Erickson-Tata. And I wouldn't have missed Ryan for anything in the world. At one time, someone who I thought had no purpose has turned out to be the greatest purpose that I know God has for my life. Okay, buddy, you take a nap, all right? Here, let me get you a nice soft. There, how's that? You okay? Let me fix your pillow for you. Get you under there, okay? Is that better? All right, I'll see you later. Love you. I'll see you soon. Ryan and I, through a relationship with Jesus Christ, have a special bond. That what God has allowed me to learn is that what He has said to me, not in an audible voice, but in the way Ryan and I lead our lives. If you will allow me, I will use your body and Ryan's life for my special purpose. And God has been faithful to that. I didn't get that kind of satisfaction that I get in the work that God has given me now when I was in the corporate world, but He has given me the opportunity to see the fulfillment of Ryan's purpose in this life, and I'm sure that he will be glorified in the next. We need to have a God that is larger than we are. There must be We must have a God that is so large that we do not understand Him. A God that we would understand fully is no God at all. And so our God actually came and demonstrated the importance of suffering, His understanding of suffering, by suffering more than anyone in history that I am aware of. Through His crucifixion, through His scourging, through the shame that was placed upon Him, through burial in a tomb. And He submitted to that. Of course, we believe to rise again and to live and to overcome death permanently. And that was His message here on earth. And so we are all led to that place of suffering. We all will suffer. There is no escaping this earth without suffering. Ryan was the pathway by which I became a seeker of God, to try to understand why my son was the way he was, what was his purpose. And God continues to reveal the answers to those. I expect that one day I will understand them fully. I don't expect that I will understand it all now, but He has revealed enough to me that Ryan and I have a wonderful relationship. He is extraordinary value to me. He is made in the image of God, and it has helped me understand the purpose for which I was born.
There's a ramp at the headquarters of Joni and Friends, a ramp that winds around the chapel and to the second floor. That ramp is called Ryan's Run, and there's a Bible verse printed on the plaque at its base. Philippians chapter 1, verse 25 says, and I want you to listen to this as though Ryan were speaking. It says, I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith, so that, through my being with you, your joy in Christ may overflow on account of me. I mean, it's account of Ryan that Doug Mazza is leading Joni and Friends and growing this ministry around the world. And every time a disabled man receives a wheelchair, or a family of a handicapped child is rescued from divorce, or depression is lifted off the disabled teenager's shoulders, I mean, anytime anyone experiences progress and joy in the faith, when anything of eternal worth happens here at Joni and Friends, it gets credited to Ryan's account. I mean, Doug wouldn't be here were it not for his son Ryan. And Ryan, his life is touching millions, literally. And that's a lot of meaning for a young man with Crouzon syndrome. And frankly, I couldn't trust a God who didn't experience suffering. I mean, Ryan lives with a shattered skull. Then you might be struggling with shattered hopes, dreams, shattered kneecap. What do you do with your pain? Well, suffering is a fork in the road, and you've got a choice. One road winds its way down into a valley of numb despair, and the other rises to a hill and a cross where Jesus met suffering head on. Is God trustworthy? If Ryan were sitting at that fork in your road, I believe he'd point you on the one where Jesus awaits to give you faith and courage, hope, and peace.